Very good evening to all of you. Uh, so last class we started our discussion on Karma Yoga, and we learned that Karma Yoga is a way of life that leads us to perfection by way of performing our actions. And by action, we don't categorize some action as superior or some actions inferior, nor do we say that some actions are secular and some actions are spiritual, and only the spiritual actions can lead you towards perfection, whereas secular action cannot. Because the basic premise of Karma Yoga is every action, when it is rightly performed with a proper attitude, can make you a better person, can help you in manifesting the divinity within you. As I told you, Karma Yoga is the path. It is a link that connects the Jivatman with the Paramatman. When you perform karma with an attitude of yoga, then you get in touch with your higher reality that is ever present in each one of us. So Karma Yoga that way is very much applicable to all of us, because we are in this world of action, and right from birth to death we will be engaged in some action or another. Even if we say, I won't do any work, Krishna tells that your very nature will force you to work. So it's our nature to work. So instead of doing that work that pulls us down, we will do the work in a proper spirit so that the work liberates us. So that's how Shankaracharya also defines Karma Yoga. He tells even though the karma is of the nature of, it's of binding nature, but still when it is done with a spirit of equanimity and with a surrender to God, then this very same karma can lead you to moksha. So how to do it is the subject matter of this book. And then we discussed a very important idea that the goal of human life is not enjoyment. Pleasure seeking cannot be the goal of human life. The goal of human life is something higher. It is the search for knowledge. And this knowledge, our one of our previous past presidents of Ramakrishna Math and Mission, Swami Ranganathananji, beautifully put it as science is the pursuit of knowledge in the external world, and religion is the pursuit of knowledge in the internal world. So both science and spirituality are a pursuit of knowledge. One tries to seek knowledge from the external nature, and another tries to find out seek that knowledge in the internal nature. Even though at the outset, at the beginning, both the secular and spiritual knowledge appears to be worlds apart, but the more you go deeper and deeper into either any branch of knowledge for that matter, and it's secular sciences, so the greatest scientist, the greatest physicist of the world, they become spiritualists at the end. If you like read the biography of Albert Einstein, Oppenheimer, and all the founding fathers of quantum physics, they had to seek an answer that will validate their findings, their conclusions, because they could not find it within the paradigm of the conventional physics. So they have to seek a validity beyond the material science, and they found the validity of the thoughts in Vedanta. And in that regard, most of you will know the correspondence that took place between Albert Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore. And so like that, knowledge is, we classify it as Paravidya and Aparavidya. And Paravidya is all that of the knowledge of the world, and Aparavidya is something that is beyond this world. And our human life, we should side by side pursue both this knowledge, as all of you who are listening to this talk today are doing. So you are pursuing the uh, Aparavidya and also Paravidya. So that gives you a balanced personality, and so that is how it has to be. And that's what Swamiji has told, that a day will come when the science and religion will meet and shake hands, and religion and philosophy will become friends. So now they seem to be at loggerheads, they seem to be in conflict. But when you go to the core of science, at the core of spirituality, then you will come to the same reality, face to face with the same reality. So Swamiji says, according to Vedanta, the goal of human life is pursuit of knowledge, and pleasure cannot be the sole aim. And if we misuse this human body just for the pursuit of enjoyments, then we are no better than animals. That's what Mahabharata tells, that there are something very common between the human beings and the animals. What are they? At the physical level, there is lot of common things. So agara, nidra, bhayam and maithuna. So agara, nidra, bhayam, maithunam cha samanya metat pasubir naranam dharmohi tesham adhiko vishesha dharmena hina pasubir samana. So the Mahabharata tells, so the need for taking food, agara, the need for nidra, the need for sleep, means agara and nidra together, we can say all the physical needs, the need to breathe, the need to eat, the sleep to keep ourselves clean. So these are very common between animals and human beings. And then at the level of emotions, the bhaya, the fear and anxiety and all those things, you can find it common between animals and also human beings. And maithuna, the desire, the instinct of procreation, self procreation is also common to animals and also to human beings. But as having got the human birth, if we utilize it solely for this purpose, for our physical enjoyments, for agara, nidra, maithuna, bhaya, then we are no better than animals. We are committing a suicide. That's what Upanishad tells. Human being having got a human birth, if he doesn't cultivate this quest for perfection, if he doesn't cultivate spiritual knowledge, then he is actually committing suicide. And so that is one idea we should keep in mind. And last class, I think we ended with someone questioning that there are many people who don't believe in spirituality, who don't believe in rebirth. So because we discussed about karma, karma phala, about how the karma phalas are get transferred from one birth to another birth, how that our human birth in the present life is determined by our previous karmas. So suppose the valid question was, if you don't believe in all these things, then you can lead a very happy, carefree life. Why carry all these things into your mind? Why confuse your mind with all these things? Why not lead a very simple, carefree, easygoing life? So that seems a very appealing and a very valid question. And strangely, it is not just a modern question. Right from the very beginning of human beings started philosophizing, so these questions were also asked. So we have a school of philosophy called Charvakas in our ancient tradition, who used to put the same questions to the spiritualist. They will tell, Yavat jive sukham jive. So as long as I live, let me live happily. How? Rinam kritva gritam pibet. Even by borrowing money, I will buy some liquor and I will drink and live happily. Because my philosophy is Yavat jive sukham jive. As long as I'm alive, I will live seeking pleasures. And then why? What is the logic they give? The logic they give is asmin bhasmasya degasya punar agamanam kutar. Once this body dies and gets reduced into ashes, nothing remains. And there is no question of rebirth. There is no question of karma or karma phala. Has anyone seen all these things? Then why bother about all these things? Why can't we live happily to our heart's content? So this is a very compelling argument that goes through our minds also. So what is the answer Swamiji gives? In this, the first paragraph itself, Swamiji tells pleasure cannot be the goal. It is a mistake to consider that pleasure is the goal. And the cause of all miseries in the world is because people adopt this materialistic philosophy. This materialistic philosophy is the cause of all sorrows that we find in this world. Why? Because there cannot be in your life, you cannot avoid pain, you cannot avoid sufferings, you cannot avoid heartbreaks. So they are inevitable. Pleasure and pain, they are upwards and reverse of the same coin. So when you madly go in pursuit of pleasure, what you inevitably get is also an equal measure of pain also. But it doesn't appear to be there at the beginning. You are not aware of it, but a pursuit of pleasure also invites pain also. And it is inevitable because they are twins, inseparable twins. So the question is asked is, do you want your human life? Do you want to be a plaything for these twin forces of pleasure and pain? Or do you have the capacity to rise higher than this pleasure and pain? Is a human being just like a machine? He has no other option. When he has to pursue pleasure, pain also comes. He cannot avoid it. He cannot say, no, I will lead a life of 100% pure happiness. That is not possible. So, is there a way out? So, all these yogas tell us the way out. And Swamiji tells there are two paths open. One is the path of pleasure and pain, and another is the path of truth. So you can pursue the path of pleasure, or you can pursue the path of truth. So, and most of the people, initially they follow the path of pleasure and pain, the normal human beings. But a time comes in the life of every human being when he stops and asks questions. What am I doing? What is the purpose of life? What should I do? Is there anything, some higher reality? Why these things happen to me? He starts asking questions. So he wants to find answers to some reality that is beyond him. So that hunger, it comes in the heart of every human being, maybe now or maybe at the end of your life, or it can come at your later births also. But in spite of having riches, in spite of having all enjoyments, in spite of having name and fame and relations, everything, people still remain unsatisfied. People still remain unhappy. A famous millionaire once told, normal people cannot understand how unhappy a rich man can be. We believe a person, if he is rich, means he is very happy. We equate material wealth, we equate money with richness. To up to a particular level, the money can give you happiness, but beyond a limit, the money is not going to add anything more to your sense of happiness. So that's a totally different topic. But this much at the beginning, we should keep in mind that human life is for the pursuit of truth, is for the pursuit of knowledge. And in this pursuit of truth, in this pursuit of knowledge, our tradition has divided our life into 4 compartments. In the last class, if you remember, I told you about the Purusharthas, the 4 goals of human life, Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. And that 4 goals can be again divided into 2. They can be subsumed into 2 groups. The Dharma, Artha and Kama, together can be called as Abhyudaya, and the moksha is called as Nishreyasa. Abhyudaya is the pursuit of material good, the pursuit of goals in this material world, and Nishreyasa is the pursuit of goal in the spiritual dimension. So, according to our tradition, Shankaracharya tells Dvidohi Vedokta Dharmaha. According to Vedas, Dharma is of two types. One is the Abhyudaya, another is Nishreyasa. Every human being has to pursue these twin dharmas. Initially, he will start with the Dharma, Artha and Kama, but finally he has to graduate towards moksha. In this thing, we divide our life into four ashramas. So most of you are young people, and I don't know how much you know about our Hindu way of life, because most of us as children, we don't get exposed to our own traditions, our own knowledge, and we most of all confine ourselves as religion mean going to temples or observing fast or doing some rituals. They are very essential. They are of course part of religion, but religion has many dimensions. So one is to know what is the purpose of life and how to go about it. So in that respect, along with the Purusharthas, then we have that Varnashrama. Varnashrama is our Vedas tell the full human life is 100 years. Shatayusha Purushaha. Purusha is the normal life is 100 years. So they divide it into 25 years each. As the first 25 years they call it as Brahmacharya, the next 25 years Grahastha, another third 25 is Vanaprastha, and the final is Sannyasa. So it's a rough order. So the first 25 years is the life of Brahmacharya, a time period of life when you devote yourself exclusively for the pursuit of knowledge and for the pursuit of skills in developing yourself to be a productive, useful citizen in the society. And after you have completed that, and that is that Brahmacharya, the characteristic of that period of life is tapasya. Tapas and Brahmacharya go together. What is tapasya? Tapasya, the first, we immediately the word evokes the feeling. Tapas means going to forest or mountains and austerity. Tapas means austerity, depriving ourselves and torturing ourselves. So that is one aspect of tapasya. But for a brahmachari, for a student, for a vidyarthi, the tapasya means primarily concentration. That's how Shankaracharya tells. Tapasya is concentration. The concentration of your mind, the concentration of your indriyas, of all your sense organs, your capacity, the concentration of your mind, your emotion, your indriya, sense organs, and towards a pursuit of knowledge. So that is that concentration. Manasascha indriyascha aikagriyam paramam tapa. The concentration of mind and indriyas is the paramam tapa, the supreme tapas. And a brahmachari is supposed, a vidyarthi, a student, is supposed to practice this tapas. He is supposed to lead a life dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. That will be his prime focus. He is not going to allow himself to be distracted by other things. He is focused on his goal of acquiring knowledge. And in the other places, Swamiji will tell that concentration is like an intense searchlight that can reveal all the hidden knowledge that is there in the nature. Nature will be forced to give its knowledge that it is hiding itself in its bosom. By the power of concentration, we can reveal the knowledge in the external nature and the internal nature. And this concentration is the primary aid of the vidyarthi, of a student. The student life is a time of practicing tapas, of austerity, of depriving oneself and for restraining oneself, disciplining oneself your one mind and organs so that you acquire knowledge. So once you are done this, so automatically you go to the next stage of life, that is the grahastha or the householder. So householder, so now he has finished his education, now he gets a job, he starts a family, he settles down, he looks after his own family, his extended family, and he has duties to the society. And we will see in the next lectures, other classes, what are the duties of a householder also. So then once the householder stage is over, so you have established, you have done your duty to this world, you have brought up your children, and your children are settled well, and your responsibilities have reduced, and you have retired. So normally we can tell in this present scenario, the retirement stage as the starting of the vanaprastha. And so now you're still, your body and your mind, your faculty, your intellect, everything is still okay, first class. You can still be very productive, you can be independent, you can contribute to your society, you have accumulated so much of wealth, experience, you have so much of wisdom, knowledge, which you can, so that is the stage when you share with the society in a charitable manner. So as a grahastha, your focus was mainly in acquiring wealth for yourself and for others. But as the level of vanaprastha, after retirement, our tradition tells now you utilize, you share your knowledge, you share your wealth, you share your expertise freely to this world. Let this phase of your life be of service to the society. So try to give yourself free. You have been all the time, you have been thinking about yourself, your family. Now you think more about others. You give. So that is the stage of vanaprastha. Traditionally, that stage marks the renunciation of your household duties. The husband and wife, they give up, hand over the family responsibilities, the wealth and other thing to the children, and they go and settle in an ashrama in the forest. So that's how the vanaprastha came. But now forests are not, that's not an option. That mentally you have to be a vanaprastha. A stage comes when you voluntarily reduce your responsibilities and you withdraw yourself from the society. You become more and more of an observer rather than a participator. You don't become too much involved in the worldly things. You detach yourself. You practice the detachment. So that is another very enriching stage. So slowly you will find, starting from the state of Vidyarthi to Grahastha to Vanaprastha, how the human being is evolving, he is growing as a person, is maturing as a person. And then this stage reaches its culmination at the stage of sannyasa, that at the fag end of your life, then when your senses, your indriyas, your body, the capacities have reduced, and so now you are aware that your days in this world is very limited, and you have to leave this place. Then that is the time when you have to cut off all the bondages of this world. You are not going to take all everything that you have accumulated. You have so much of good memories, bad memories, so much of success, failures, defeats, and so much anger, frustration, so many emotions we have accumulated all these years. Would you want to die with all these negative things? So that is the time when you totally renounce these worldly feelings and you devote exclusively to spiritual pursuits for pursuit of higher dimension. So if you, this is the entire scheme of thing. A human being, a normal human being, if he can follow this scheme laid out by our scriptures, then he will lead a very fulfilled, balanced, mature life, which will be a blessing to him and to his society also. And this is what is called as dharma. So what if someone asks you what dharma is? Dharma is doing the duty that is corresponding to your stage of life. Whatever your stage of life where you are in, what is the duties that are equal, what is the duties that correspond to that stage. Doing that is the dharma of that stage. As a Vidyarthi, your dharma is acquiring knowledge. Your dharma is not acquiring money, or your dharma is not acquiring pleasure. Say suppose a Vidyarthi is there and till 50 years he remains only the Vidyarthi. He is not earning money, he is not contributing, he is just leading all the time, he is telling I am studying, studying, studying. And he remains a burden to the society, he remains a burden to others. So he has failed to achieve its purpose. Or if at the age of 15 years he becomes an householder, that also is natural growth, evolution gets disturbed. That is, he is not doing justice to his own potential. Or suppose an householder, a grihastha, he has led a very successful life. Now what we do, so we have seen so many industrialists, they have been CEOs, they have run big corporations, and then after a stage of life, 60 years, then they venture into philanthropy. Either they start their own trust or they go and join other trusts, and they utilize the professional experience in the philanthropical causes. So suppose if a householder does not do that, he till the last moment of his life he is engaged in just money, 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 money. So that again is failing to do justice to this human birth. So what we have to be clear about it, our life as a stages of life is the every stage has a particular set of karmas to be done, and doing that is our dharma, and doing that will lead us to a higher stage. It will help us to evolve into a better person. So that is one idea today I want to discuss. And another thing is, naturally a question comes and the answer was also given. As I told you, if we suppose do not pursue spiritual knowledge and confine ourselves to just material pursuits, what happens? So the answer is also given in one of our Upanishads. So these are all fundamental questions which pertain to our human nature, and human nature is the same, whether it was 3000 years before or now or 3000 years henceforth. Human nature, the basic nature of human being is not going to change. So the problems and the solutions, what was applicable then is also essentially applicable now. It will be applicable in future also. So in one of our Upanishads called Mundaka Upanishad, a small simile is stored. The example is given of two birds. So one bird is there sitting at a lower branch and it is eating fruits. Sometimes it gets a sweet fruit, it is very happy. Sometimes it gets a bitter or a rotten fruit and it's unhappy. And alternatively, it's passing between these two emotions, happiness, unhappiness, frustration, bitterness. But now and then it looks high, and at a higher branch, it sees another bird which is sitting calmly, which doesn't have a necessity to eat these fruits and go through all these emotions. It is calm, contained, self-sufficient within itself. And so the lower bird looks at that and sees how nice the state is, how if I also can become like that, how wonderful it will be. So then again it forgets, again it goes through, and finally as it gets more and more such experiences, duality of experience, it slowly graduates upper and upper and goes towards that higher bird, and realizes, a realization happens, and it finds that it was all along the higher bird alone. It was falsely, it was thinking that it was the lower bird, but its real nature is that supreme bird. So that is a very powerful mantra in the Mundaka Upanishad. But Swami Vivekananda explains this mantra in his own eloquent, inspiring words in one of his lectures, Vedanta and its application to Indian life. It forms part of a series of lectures given by Swamiji when he came back from the West for the first time, and he traveled from Ceylon along the length and breadth of India. At many places he gave lectures. In one of his lectures, he explains this, and he tells this mantra explains in nutshell the philosophy of the world, the philosophy of the Hindus. So what is this philosophy? We should know. So I am just reading out the Swamiji's lecture, passages from Swamiji's lecture. There are 3-4 paragraphs are there. So I shall just read out. So it's essentially, it will make our discussions clear. Whatever I have been telling now for the past 30 minutes, so it will become more clear when you just listen carefully to these words of Swami Vivekananda. I read. So again, where can you find a more perfect expression of the whole philosophy of the world, the gist of what the Hindus ever thought, the whole dream of human salvation, painted in language more wonderful, in figure more marvelous than this? So Swamiji is telling, so this is the entire philosophy of the world in a nutshell. It is presented here. And whatever the Hindus have thought, according to the ultimate reality goal of human life, the gist of that thought means if you know this, we have known the gist of our entire philosophy, the aim and goal, the purpose of human life. So Swamiji is explaining. So the mantra I'm not reading, just I'm going to the passage. Upon the same tree, there are two birds of a beautiful plumage, most friendly to each other, one eating the fruits, the other sitting there calm and silent without eating. The one on the lower branch eating sweet and bitter fruits in turn and becoming happy and unhappy. But the other one on the top, calm and majestic, he eats neither sweet nor bitter fruits, cares neither for happiness nor misery. He is immersed in his own glory. This is the picture of the human soul. So now Swamiji is coming to the describing what our ordinary human life is. Man is eating the sweet and bitter fruits of this life, pursuing gold, pursuing his senses, pursuing the vanities of life, hopelessly, madly carrying he goes. Such is the career of men, pursuing the vanities of life, children dreaming golden dreams, only to find that they are but vain, and old men chewing the cud of their past deeds, and yet not knowing how to get out of this network. This is the world. Yet in the life of everyone, there come golden moments in the midst of the deepest sorrows, nay, of the deepest joys. There come moments when a part of the cloud that hides the sunlight moves away as it were, and we catch a glimpse, in spite of ourselves, of something beyond, away beyond the life of the senses, away beyond its vanities, its joys and its sorrows, away beyond nature, or our imaginations of happiness here or hereafter, away beyond all thirst of gold or for fame or for name or for posterity. Man stops for a moment at this glimpse and sees the other bird calm and majestic, eating neither sweet nor bitter fruits, but immersed in his own glory. He catches that glimpse, but again he forgets and goes on eating the sweet and bitter fruits of life. Perhaps after a time, he catches another glimpse, and the lower bird goes nearer and nearer to the higher bird as blows and blows are received. If he be fortunate to receive hard blows, then he comes nearer and nearer to his companion. The other bird is like his friend, and as he approaches him, he finds that the light from the higher bird is playing round his own plumage, and as he comes nearer and nearer, oh no, the transformation is going on. The nearer and nearer he comes, he finds himself melting away as it were, until his own personality is entirely disappeared. He did not really exist. It was but the reflection of the other bird who was there calm and majestic amidst the moving leaves. It was all his glory, the upper bird. He then becomes the fearless, perfectly satisfied, calmly serene. In this figure, the Upanishad takes you from the dualistic to the utmost Advaitic conception. So the lower bird is the Jivatman, the higher bird is the Paramatman, and we have to go through these experiences of the world. We cannot escape. Escapism is not spirituality. In the name of spirituality, you cannot escape from the duties of your world. If a person cites spiritual reasons to shirk his own responsibilities to his society, to his station of life, then he is doing injustice both to himself and is also injustice to religion and spirituality. So spirituality is not escapism. So Swamiji here tells all these experiences, they have a value in life. They have a place in life. Every human soul has to go through these experiences of pleasure and pain, of all these dualities. You cannot jump. You cannot say, I won't go through all this experience. I will directly jump to moksha. I will directly become a saint. So that cannot be attained in a single life. It cannot be bypassed. There is no shortcut to spirituality. There is no shortcut to moksha. Yeah, everyone has to go through this path. He whom you see at the apex of spiritual perfection, he also at one stage has gone through all these things which we are now going through. So there is no separate path. There is only one path which every soul has to take. In this journey, some are ahead, some are behind. So imagine it's like a marathon race. This race towards perfection, it's a marathon race. It has many laps. Say 10 laps are there. So some have just started this race, and some are at the third lap, some are at the fifth lap, some are just at the end. So we are at different stages of our evolution. But finally, the one destination is the same. We finally reach the end. But we are at different stages of evolution. So according to our stage, we have to fulfill those duties and responsibilities. So giving up those duties and responsibilities and yearning for higher things will only deter your evolution, will be only detrimental to your growth as a growth of the soul. So these pleasure and pain, these worldly experiences, they are very much essential. They are essential for the maturity of the soul. A soul has to mature to, first of all, to understand, to have the need for spirituality. A certain maturity has to come to that soul. It doesn't come naturally. There are millions of people. Not everyone is inclined to come to spirituality, to read these books, to listen to this talk, to think these things. So a certain maturity is essential. A certain receptivity is essential. And that receptivity comes, it cannot be forced. It comes at a particular, when the soul has evolved, it has reached a particular maturity. And how that maturity comes? Only by going through all these experiences of this world. So each of experiences, they have it has a role, it has a meaning. And there is a funny story, is that once a young man, he got intense vairagya and he wanted to become a monk. So he went to a monastery and he told, I want to meet the head Swamiji there. So they took him to meet the head Swami. And the head Swami was sitting in a nicely decorated, in a well-furnished office with a air-conditioned computer and all sofas, everything. And he was very much impressed. Wow, he is leading a very comfortable life. Good. He made a mark. And then he told, I came to join this order. Then he told, okay, good. Then, okay, I will show you the place. And he was sent to the place where the newcomers are accommodated. And when he went to that habitation, he found that that was in striking contrast to the way in which the head Swami was living. It was very sparsely furnished with basic accommodation facilities. And then suddenly he had an idea. And he came back to the head Swami and told, Swami, I had a change of mind. I came to join this order as a novice, but having seen both the lifestyle, now I changed my mind. I don't want to become a novice. I want to become the head Swami like you. So you make me an head Swami. So naturally, the monk smiled at him and said, "So that you cannot. It's not a walk-in. You just walk in and become a head Swami. Come to that post. So you have to go through this grind." So similarly, sometimes people read few books and cultivate many thoughts. Have sometimes have very high opinion of themselves. They imagine so many things, get visions, and they go astray. And so you have to be very careful in doing all this. And simple Swamiji tells us, be rational. Let intellect be your guide. So spirituality does not ask you to shut off your intellect. So faith has a very important role to play in spirituality, but what religion spirituality insists does not go against reason. So reason will be our touchstone for everything that we take. Again and again, Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji again and again stressed, you test a thing like a money changer test a coin. Do not accept anything. That's what even Buddha also told. Do not accept anything just because it comes from an ancient tradition, just because your holy books tell, just because venerable people tell, just because your society, that is what asks you to believe. That's because it is a fate, passing fate. But it tells you analyze it, you think about it, you cogitate, and if you are convinced that it will do you good, then only accept. That alone will do you good. That assimilation of whatever information that comes, whether it is in the material world or in spiritual world, is very essential. You are all scholars. You are reading science and other things. So mere accumulation of knowledge is not going to help you in the long run. You have to assimilate that knowledge. How will you assimilate? How will you internalize? That can come only when you ponder about it, think about it, cogitate, you ask questions, do. So whatever you do it in the external science, the same thing you have to do it in the spiritual life also. Spiritual life is not in a blindfoldedly you will do and say something. You have to walk with your open eyes. You have to walk with a clear intellect, and intellect will tell you, your heart will tell you that it is a truth, it is right. So that's another idea. Just almost the time is over. Just one more thought. See, thus we are just reading the first page of Karma Yoga, but still so many ideas are there in this book. Every page, it's a mine of spiritual ideas, which are very practical and rational. Swamiji has condensed almost the entire thoughts by the humanity, whatever the humanity has thought in its existence, entire thoughts are being compressed in this one little book. So I will be going very slowly unless you ask me to go fast. And so another idea, just I introduce it and then we will discuss it later in the next class, is the character. So all of us want to be men and women of good character. And what character is, how character is formed, how can I refine my character? If there are some bad things in my character, how can I get rid of it? How can I cultivate good things? So all there is a science to it. It's not magic. It's not that you take some mantra or you take some purana, some medicines, or someone touches your head and your character becomes good. No, it's not like that. You have to build your own character. Each one of you, you are responsible for the character you possess. And whatever you are now is the result of the actions, the karmas that you have done, and till the previous moment. And what you are going to be tomorrow from henceforth is the result of the karma that you are doing now. Suppose for the last 45 minutes you have been listening to this karma of listening to my talk. So whatever good you have got, so that has again changed your from henceforth, at least you will have some few good ideas, some different thoughts in your mind. So character is formed. Our present state of character is the result of all our past actions and our future, whatever we want to be. So that also lies in our hands. By doing our actions, now we can shape our future, our character in the future. So how to do it? It's a very scientific, systematic analysis. Simple thing what Swamiji just introduced it is every karma, as you told, every karma leaves a result. It's like, say there is a calm lake and you throw a stone. What happens? The stone creates a ripple and the ripple spreads and slowly it dies and the lake again becomes calm. So same thing happens in our mind, but with a difference. What is that? The moment you do some action, it also creates a similar ripple in our mind. And that ripple sets forth the internal reactions. And that reaction spreads. And slowly, unless the external ripples which died away, the internal ripples, they only go deeper into our subconscious mind. They don't die away. So whatever karma that we do, so its effect is it leaves an impression on our mind. Simple, let me tell you. Suppose you go to you along with your friends, you go to a shop and the shopkeeper tells today a new flavor of ice cream has come. You just take that ice cream and you taste it. It's a distinct flavor which you have not tasted it before. It immediately makes an impression in your mind. You suppose you like the taste, you get a very good pleasant impression. So what that impression does for 1 second, few seconds, it was there in your mind, then it sinks to the bottom of your mind. You are not anymore aware. So you are immersed in conversation with your friends. You are not thinking about the ice cream anymore. You have other things of discussion, but still that initial impression of pleasantness, it has made an impression in your mind and it has now percolated deeper and it remains there as an impression. So next time what happens, again you go to the shop, again a discussion comes, let us go to the shop, what to order. Then this impression that was there, that was formed, which you have forgotten, that impression again, it creates a memory. Oh, that day I ate that ice cream, I liked it, let me share it with my friends. So again, you order the same ice cream and again eat. So again that impression. So second time, the same impression is again going into your mind. So what happens? That impression becomes strengthened. Now it is strong because 2 times you have experienced it. So similarly, that's how our mind functions. That's how our character is formed. Swamiji tells action creates impressions and impression leads to habits and habits form character. So what character is? It action, you do some actions, they leave some impression in your mind and these impressions, either you like it or you don't like it. Whatever you like, you try to do it more and more, and whatever you don't like, you don't avoid it. So both your likes and dislikes, your action and inaction, both together, they become a habit. What is habit? Habit is repeated action. Why you do some action, why you avoid some action, is because you like to do some action, you don't like to do some action. Where does this likes and dislikes come? It likes and dislikes come from within. How it has formed? It is formed from our previous memories, the memories of previous, the same action it has created. So these habits, the sum total of these habits is what you called as character. If these habits are good, you become a man of good character. If the totality of the habits are bad, then you become a man of bad character. Most of us, we are neither 100% good or 100% bad. We are a mixture of good and badness with predominantly good habits. And we are better, but we want to refine our character. We want to eliminate the bad habits. We want to improve our good habits. We want to introduce more good habits. How to do that? So that's also is a topic of Karma Yoga, which we will read in the next class, hopefully next month. Thank you. So if you have any question, you may ask.
Hello. Hello. Namaskar, Shamiji. My name
Yes.
my name is Shomo Sarkar.
Ah,
So I have a question from your past class, past lecture. So
yes.
you talked about this idea of accumulating karmafal over successive lifetimes, and the problem that I mean, the question that I'm thinking is that this can never be. I mean, this can never be realized. I mean, this can never be verified in real life. So, how did the ancient philosophers come to this particular truth that that karmafala accumulates over successive lifetimes?
Yeah. How did they arrive at this conclusion? How did they arrive at the
Yes.
theory? So
Yes.
that comes because they studied their own mind, and they studied when they died within, when they studied their own mind. Just as I discussed now, they were uh, they were analyzing their mind. They were finding what is the effect of karma on the mind. We study the effect of karma on the external world, but they studied the effect of karma on the internal world, on the mind. So they find that the karma leaves a impression on the mind. And then, so that what first of all made you to do that karma, it has previous impressions. So it's like a endless cycle. What caused that impression? It was caused by karma. And what caused karma? It was caused by the previous impression. So it's like a endless cycle. So this cycle led them to the slowly with birth to birth. It's like an infinite cycle, and it led to the first at the beginning. And at the beginning, so then naturally the question comes, then how the question is, how did the beginning came? What was the first karma, or what was the first impression, where from where it all started? So our answer is, it never started nor it will end. It's like a cycle. So we don't have creation in Hindu philosophy. We don't have creation. We have only projection. We have a period of projection and the period of evolution and a period of involution. Evolution and involution. A period when this universe is projected, and again it goes back to the seed state, and again it comes back to the manifested state. So there is manifestation and there is a state of total suspension. So it is a entire cycle. So what our answer is, what is true of the external world is also true of the internal world. So this is the endless cycle. It has neither a beginning nor an end, or its beginning is never known. There is no beginning. And again, philosophically, and when you attain that ultimate of perfection, then you will realize there was this cycle itself was unreal. You are neither born nor you die. So that's what we even mentioned in this thing. So as far as your question is concerned, how did they arrive at the theory? They arrived at this theory by studying their own mind. And when they studied their mind, when they studied this universe, of which the mind is just a smaller uh, template, a microcosm and the macrocosm are built on the same pattern. And when they studied the mind, they found that it leads to an infinite cycle of karma and karma phala, leading to almost an infinite cycle. And then they asked the question, how to come out of that. So our aim in philosophy is to always how to come out of this. Is not to find out why it has come. And in fact, Swamiji in many places in Jnana Yoga lectures he will discuss, there is no answer to why. Because to find an answer, you have to rise to an higher plane of reality. As Einstein also told, a problem does not have a solution in the same plane of reality in which it was created. So in order to find an answer to this question, you have to rise to an higher reality. And when you rise to that higher reality, the question no more exists. So in fact, what Maya is, no answer can be given. It is called anirvachaniya. And last class also I told another answer which Swamiji gave. Karma is a theory. He says he doesn't tell it is a truth. He says it is a theory which satisfactorily explains all the things that we see in our world in a rational manner. And suppose if a person says, I don't believe in this theory, then our tradition says you don't have to. We don't say you have to believe. Everyone, and it is not our job also to convince everyone to see the things as we see. Each one can see things in their own way. So our traditional way of looking at things is this is a theory which answers all the questions, and our aim is to not to find an answer. Our thing is to escape this cycle, not to go around the cycle or not to analyze the cycle. The cycle itself is false. So only Buddha also, he won't indulge in all this philosophy. In fact, Buddha's attitude is very simple. He tells why think about karma, why think about punarjanma and all these theories. It will only confuse you more. Yeah, and he never discussed all these things. His way of analyzing is totally different. We will see it in the next lecture of mine in that class. So what Buddha will never go into all this karma, even though Buddhism believes in all these things. He focuses totally on disciplining the mind, cultivating the right attitude, that Ashtanga Marga, through which a man can attain evolution. As I told you, people are of different temperaments in this world. To some, Buddha's path may appeal. The path of Jnana Yoga, that we have not discussed here, that may appeal. For some, Karma Yoga, this theory of reincarnation, that karma and the karma phala, prarabdha, these things can relate. Some people can relate to this. So for them, it comes to that. There are other people who are bhaktas. They don't have to think about all these things. For them, they say, me and my God, my mother knows everything. So what we are discussing is Karma Yoga, and Karma Yoga has this set of ideas. So it may or may not appeal to you, but you have to, there are so many paths are there. So you have to select a path which appeals to you. And another idea is, it is not our job to convince everyone. A person may or may not believe, but for our own conviction, we have to ask questions, just as you are asking. And more we ask questions, more we read all these things, more we listen to these lectures, slowly things may get clear. And not only by our intellectual pursuits, side by side with our practice, with our life, these things become much more palpable, real, only when they are practiced in our life. Only our mind becomes pure. So spiritual knowledge is somewhat qualitatively different from the intellectual knowledge, because spiritual knowledge has to be absorbed through our mind, and the mind has to be prepared before we can go to the real essence of these truths. Just so many ideas I have told you, and it may be confusing, and you think about it. And my phone number is there with Sujay, and later if you can talk, I can be more, I can explain you more.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Swamiji, I have a question. I'm Yogesh
Yes.
Pai from National Law University in Delhi. So I was once asked about this, what is this karma question when I was abroad. And at that point of time, I was trying to give an escapist answer. And let me know if this is a correct way of understanding it also. Because Ramana Maharshi said, when somebody asked Ramana Maharshi, how do you treat others? And the classic, Western response, Abrahamic response is the way, you treat yourself. I think that's what Christ said. But Ramana Maharshi's response was, there is no other. So if there is no other, it means that, in this life we live and we die, and whatever we do in terms of effects, suppose we destroy the forest, then whatever takes birth next that is going to, face the destruction of the karma, whatever good, bad, whatever karma, because there is no distinction between this life and the next life and the previous life, and it is a continuous, sort of cyclical, kind of exercise. And because there is no other, can we say that the theory of karma would simply mean, in simplistic terms, that whatever we do has impact on whatever that is going to come? So, and whatever has happened in the past is impacting us, because there is no difference between us and the people who lived earlier in the spiritual plane of existence. Could that be an explanation, Swamiji?
Yeah, when Ramana Maharishi told that there is no other, it's the highest spiritual realization. So, Neha Nanasti Kinchana, there is nothing other. Ekameva Dvitiyam, Advitiyam. There is only one. There is no second thing. So, that is the highest realization. And from that state, there is no world, there is no Jiva, there is no Jagat. It's all Brahman. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahman. So, from that level, there is, this discussion doesn't come. So, there are different levels of philosophy, there are different levels of experience, and different levels of explanation that is applicable to those people who are at that level. So when we are discussing this karma phala and other things, these are for beginners. These are those who are set the path to the spirituality, who are just taken first few steps in the spiritual life. So to them, all this karma and all these theories, this rebirth and all those things are taught. So that is the beginning of spirituality. That's not the end. That's not the ultimate truth. It's a relative truth. It is truth, but it's not the ultimate truth. But that's what Swamiji also hinted in the story which I read out to you. The two birds. Initially, the bird thought it was different from the higher bird, and it was going through all these experiences. But later, at the final end, it realized its oneness with the same bird, and it came to the conclusion that I am all along the higher bird. I never existed as a separate bird. I never ate all those fruits, and I never went through the karma. It's all of them appears like a dream. How it is? Say, suppose in the sleep, you see so many dreams you are seeing, and those dreams are very real to you. But when you wake up, what happens to the dream? So you tell the dreams are unreal, even though they were real at that state. So similarly, the spiritual realization is that when you attain the spiritual realization, just like that dream state is negated when you wake up, similarly, this state of phenomenal existence, this gets negated when you wake up to that higher reality. So all these answers are at different stages, and each one of them is right, and each one of them is like a step. So you go step by step to the higher path. So we cannot, as I told you, we cannot jump directly to that. So all these are true. All these are one way of looking at the world, one way of looking at the highest reality, of the highest truth. The highest truth presents itself in different ways according to the different people, according to the level of the different people, understanding temperaments, nature of the different people. So all of them are true. So your answer is also true at a particular level, and what Ramanatrisha is, what he told is the ultimate truth.
Thank you, Swamiji. Very nice lecture. Thank you, Swamiji.
So Sujay, so we shall stop. So thank you all. So we shall meet again.